Now we can put on.
I already did it.
Okay, comrades, we met there in the one of the Prague cafés to discuss one specific subject, and this is the October Revolution in Russia. Of course, this lead-off of mine will be in English, so as I'm not very good in English, there may be some difficulties, but I hope you will actually understand it, because I'm doing it because obviously we have there people who cannot speak Czech, so this is the reason why we're using English to make sure for YouTube, for example. So let's go straightly to the October Revolution, and you will notice immediately that I'm very much influenced by Alan Woods here when I will say that for us Marxists, the October Revolution is the greatest single event in human history. And why do we say so? We are saying because in 1917 the white Russian masses actually rose up to overthrow one of the most brutal tzarist regimes that existed during that time in the world, and the most brutal even capitalist regime, as capitalism was already introduced in Russia at that time. And those masses actually rose up to achieve the most democratic social formation that was formed during many years, thousands of years actually, in the human history. We'll wait there.
Okay.
Don't stop it, please. Don't stop it.
No, it's just turned black though.
No, it's okay. So let's continue. And this formation, what was achieved in Russia in 1917, is dictatorship of the proletariat. You know, when I say dictatorship, it seems like oppression, and actually it is class oppression, but for the first time it was the oppression of the majority of the population, the proletariat, and also the peasantry, the working people, working masses of Russia, against the former rulers, the kings, the Tsar, and also the capitalists. And there is no accident that after more than 100 years after the October Revolution of 1917, and now after the years that the Soviet Union collapsed, we are exposed to the worst demagogy of the anti-communist propaganda that is ruled by bourgeoisie against this greatest single event in human history, as I name it in the beginning of my lead-off. And of course those people are trying to portray the Bolsheviks as demons from hell, basically. You know, and in particular, this anti-communist propaganda is not scared of something that happened in the past. They are scared of the situation the capitalist system is now. So this anti-communist propaganda is even more hysterical as this capitalist system, thank you very much, is going inside its more deep crisis, and deeper crisis, what I want to say. And in particular, there is no accident that this anti-communist propaganda is targeted against the young people in our society. I know that comrade that is present here, I will not name him for the camera, told me that they are friends of his that were actually forced to go with a class on some, discussions on anti-communism, So in school you are exposed to anti-communist propaganda, and you are forced to actually be part of the meetings when they will try to brainwash you actually about how communism is bad, and how we are living in the best system ever. And also, I can say about something more concrete, and this is the performance of a secret police, the Czech secret police. Because in 2018, the BIS actually issued their, note on extremism in the Czech Republic, where they actually warned about the Soviet way of teaching of the history. in schools, which made me actually to think how they know that the teachers are teaching Soviet history in our schools. Do they have their agents amongst the young pupils about 10 years old? Are there like BIS confidence? I don't think so actually. I think what they try to do is actually to put a pressure on the teachers, to tell the teacher, hey, you have to be aware when you are teaching the history to really teach anti-communist propaganda, because if you will not, you are our enemy. This is a clear way to pressurize the teachers to actually brainwash the young people by this demagogy, by this cancerous anti-communist propaganda. There is spent like billions of Czech crowns in many campaigns like Murdered by Communists and about Jan Palach and people like this. And yeah, are those people afraid of the Soviet Union? Are those people afraid of Putin or Russia? No, they are afraid of the young people and about those people that are more and more in today's times of capitalist crisis see that this system offers nothing for them and for their future, nothing progressive, only cuts and only degradation of their standard of living actually by the cuts on the, for example, traveling costs, you know, because there were like cheaper tickets for students to travel, and now of course this was called off by the government to save money on the students. So yeah, this is one of the things that actually the students see, that the capitalism is not offering them better lives in the future. And of course, to the ruling class, for them it's not enough to actually defeat the revolution or to see the collapse of the revolution, because the Soviet Union collapsed because of the degeneration, not by direct influence of the capitalists. They need this ruling capitalist of the society to cover this revolution in mud, to really show to people that revolutions are bad. Revolutions always turn badly, you know, there will be bloody, and you will suffer because of the revolution. So don't even think about having some revolution. And of course they are more in favor of the reformist way of thinking, of the thinking that maybe by some small particular changes we can make some kind of capitalism with a human face. You know, to make capitalist system better for people by those small changes we can fight for and we are allowed for. You know, the revolutions by themselves are illegal, and every revolution in history was basically illegal in this way. But of course, if you really read something about Marxism, something about Marxist philosophy, you will see that this is not how it really works. Because one of the basic laws of dialectics is a basic law of quantity and quality. And this law is actually telling us that through the quantitative changes we will see a very quick qualitative leaps forward, which we see on everything around us. We can have examples, for example, on the water, which is a very useful example, I would say. If you will have water in a pot on the stove and you will heat it up, for a long time you will see, you know, the water will be warmer and warmer, but still it will be water. But then, in some specific point, which is 100 degrees Celsius, it will stop very quickly to be water and it will start to be a steam, you know. The water that changed its qualitative structure. And of course, if you cold the water, it will be the same. In one specific point, it will reach the point of zero, and the water will freeze. It will change its quality. And for this reason, actually, Darwin didn't understand, because he was a gradualist, he didn't understand some specific parts of the history of species, like Cambric explosions, when there was a evolution from how to say, small organisms to the organisms that had more cells. How to say, microorganisms to bigger organisms, probably. Sorry. Thank you very much. Yeah, and this leap forward that was very quick, and it's called in history Cambric explosion, was done because of the oxygen in the atmosphere that actually made the qualitative difference. There was a big leap forward in the development of human species. And Darwin didn't understand it, and he basically claimed that we just don't have enough evidence to explain the Cambric explosion. So yeah, and also this applies to the revolutions. In a long time in society, you can have situations when people are just really tired of the system around them. They know that the system is not working in their favor. Thank you very much. But there is no revolution, and the leftists and many union organizers are then like looking to their clocks and saying, "Hey, why you are not revolting? Why there is no revolution?" You know, but the revolution is something that you cannot call. Revolution is something that the masses came to through this quantitative development. The system by itself is creating in capitalism and in other societies its own grave diggers, which in capitalism is the proletarian class that by the conditions of the degrading capitalist system are coming to the collective worldwide conclusion that this system is something that is need to be changed. And they come to this conclusion without the need directly influenced by the communists. We saw it, for example, in Kazakhstan, because in Kazakhstan the Communist Party is actually banned, and the protests were not started by Communist Party. The people were fed up. You know, they lived through the times of degrading of their living standards, and the last drip of water in their cup was the price hikes in a question of gas. And this particular thing, this small thing, seemingly, bring them to the street, not because of this price hikes, but because of the overall situation. The people were fed up. The qualitative change happened, basically. And this is when the revolutions are historically starting. Yeah, but let's go back to the bourgeoisie and to the ruling class. Actually, by this hatred to the revolutions in general, the bourgeoisie is even denouncing their own history, because the capitalism came into existence through revolutions, through bourgeois revolutions. In France, America, and in other countries, the old feudalism had to be destroyed and replaced with a new system. Also this was picturized in one specific thing. Then I think it was French bourgeoisie that actually wanted to change the lyrics of the Marseillaise. Marseillaise, the revolutionary song of the French Revolution, and they are not really favorable. They don't like the lyrics, you know, how they are radical, how they are bloody. But revolutions tend to be bloody if, of course, the old order will try to defend the old regime that the masses during the revolution want to overthrow. And of course, the bourgeoisie doesn't hate Lenin and Bolsheviks because of some kind of history, but they hate them. I said it bad, the sentence, but sorry. You know, the hatred of the bourgeoisie towards the Lenin and Bolsheviks is that big, specifically for the fact that he, with the Bolsheviks, of course, rose up and actually succeeded in defeating this Russian capitalism at that time. You know, we don't see that much hatred towards, for example, French communists in the 19th century, when they actually also rose up. But also, there were at least that decent people that they let themselves to be killed, you know, because their organization was not that high, like in the case of Bolsheviks. But of course, we are standing on the shoulders of the French communists, French communards, and we have to also defend the Russian revolution. Because this Russian revolution, as I told, actually succeeded in defeating the old tzarist capitalist order, and they showed by this revolution, those communists and Bolsheviks in Russia, that it's possible to have a system, and functionable system, and very effective system, without the rule of the capitalists, without the rule of the bankers, and without the rule of the landlords, and to really achieve a very imposant results by this overthrowing of capitalism and achieving the new society. Because there was a big developments in the field of education, because the masses before were illiterate, and there was achieved full literacy during the course of the Soviet Union and its existence. Also, there was a big development on the field of the healthcare, in comparison, of course, with 1917, and also with science and technology, of course. And also on the field of the human society by itself, because there was a serious liberation of different layers of the population from before oppression. Also, we have to understand, and we have to see that many people actually ignores the fact that Russia in 1917 was a very backward country. And this backwardness is possible to quantify, to be quantified on various facts. First of all, it's the illiteracy I mentioned, which around 80% of people were actually illiterate, which is more than Afghanistan today, which is the most illiterate country in the world in this situation. And also, how many workers was there in Russia? As Alan Woods gives this information, it was a 3.5 million. From 150 million population of the Russia at that time. And yeah, so it was very hard to achieve the proletarian dictatorship in the country, where the proletariat was almost absent. And actually, during the course of the Civil War, the proletariat was almost extinct, because many workers were forced back to the rural areas to actually make a living for themselves. But those workers, which were there in 1917, were won for the Bolsheviks by very firm politics and correct politics that Lenin and Bolsheviks did in this year of 1917. And what they built actually in the years before in building of the social democracy and the Bolshevik party itself. But in the beginning of 1917, the Bolsheviks in Russia were in complete minority. I don't know maybe the precise number, I think it was 8,000 Bolsheviks we had in February Revolution in 1917. But yeah, the 1917 revolution, the February Revolution, which started the whole process, actually was not under much control of the Bolsheviks at all, because at this time the masses more listened to the more moderated, let's say, Mensheviks and social revolutionaries that had even more support amongst the peasant masses, because the SRs, the social revolutionaries, were basing themselves amongst the peasantry especially. And also, when we will see the army, and army is an important subject here, because in 1917 Russia was in war with Germany, and there was a First World War in progress. In the army, the Bolshevik influence was very weak. You know, there were individual Bolsheviks, but they were drowning in a whole sea of a peasant in arms, you know, which are originally from a petty bourgeois origin, you know, those peasants. They are not workers in a proletarian way, but yes, they have to be led during the process of the revolution by the proletariat. But as I said, the Bolsheviks has a very weak influence in the beginning of 1917 in the army. Only in the navy there was a bigger influence of the Bolsheviks, for the fact that to serve in navy you need to have some mechanical skills, you know, to operate the ships. So for this reason the sailors were actually the most progressive part of the the main force, basically armed force of the Red Guards to achieve the October Revolution after the February one. Yeah. And after defeating the Tsar in the February Revolution in 1917, and after the Tsar abdicated, it seemed that Mensheviks and SRs had the complete dominance, you know. But what the Mensheviks and SRs did, they didn't really tend to give the power to the people, because during the course of the February Revolution there was a dualism. First, the provisional government was formed up with the presence of the Bolsheviks, with the presence of Mensheviks, of course, and SRs, and also there was the Soviets. And Soviets were not something that was imposed by the Bolsheviks. It's something that masses came to through their own experience, that they have to organize themselves, they have to organize their, power on organizational basis to really have some change society they desire. So for this reason, actually, the Lenin was in favor of Soviets and not in favor of the provisional government. But as this dominance of Mensheviks and SRs seems to be, everywhere in the beginning of the year, it has a serious impact of the Bolshevik party at that time, which was under the command of two people, which was the Kamenev and Stalin. Kamenev and Stalin were in opposition to the Lenin ideas that time, because the Stalin and Kamenev actually wanted to join the Mensheviks, to join the provisional government, which Lenin strongly opposed because of this existence of dualism, because it's something that he understands will actually alien himself and the Bolshevik party from the masses themselves. So this is why actually when the Lenin and Trotsky went back from their exiles, they start to fight to really absence from the provisional government and to actually give all power to the Soviets, which was the slogan of the Lenin and Trotsky also of their times, and actually they were able to win the young layers of the Bolshevik party in their favor and their opinion in the end win, and the Bolshevik didn't join the provisional government. And this criticism of Bolshevik party in the Soviets and against the provisional government of Menshevik and SRs in the end proved to be very correct, because this provisional government where the Mensheviks and SRs were, and also the capitalists, failed to really achieve what masses by the revolution in February really wanted to achieve, which was a peace, which was a bread, and which was a land. Peace, of course, was desired because of the fact, as I told, that Russia was in the First World War, and the soldiers really didn't understand why they should die in the field for the Tsar, who abdicated. So they wanted peace as soon as possible. Second was bread, of course, because the workers were, of course, struggling because of the war, because the war really stretched the Russian economy, and also the peasants won the land, because actually feudalism was abolished in Russia only in 1861. Then there was a redistribution of the land, but it was a very poor redistribution of the land, because the old feudal lords actually got the best land, and the peasants got the worst land, which they cannot feed themselves from. So they were forced into the new factories when they were very quickly proletarized. But for those who stayed in the rural areas, they lived very poorly. So there was a need for a new redistribution of the land. So this was the demands of the Bolsheviks and also the masses, what they wanted in the course of the 1917. And this is actually something that made the Bolshevik party to rise in the eyes of the ordinary workers and peasants, and on this basis it was possible to actually achieve the revolution in October, as also the Bolshevik party rose from the small thousands of people by tens of thousands during the course of 1917. I think they have around 25,000 during the October Revolution, if I'm correct. And yeah, for this reason they actually achieved to organize the Red Guards and to win the support in Soviets to do this revolution, which started by the famous fire of the ship Aurora and by the attack of the Red Guards of the Winter Palace, which was actually completely bloodless, taking of the power by the Bolsheviks, because the guards of the Winter Palace actually surrendered to the Bolsheviks and to the Red Guard. They had no interest in fighting, and actually more people died in the movie that was recorded about it by Sergei Eisenstein, The 10 Days That Shook the World, which is also the Reed's book that I can recommend you to read. So yeah, the point is that this revolution was in the beginning completely bloodless. So the imagination of the bloody Bolsheviks that want to kill everybody in 1917 is completely false. That the anti-communist propaganda is trying to portray. And actually the Bolsheviks had to defend themselves, and this is the fact that they actually saved many lives, because as they were organized in the Red Army and in the Czech, this actually prevented the murdering of vast sections of the Russian population, because many people imagine that if the Bolsheviks will not take power, you will have a nice bourgeois democracy in Russia happening, which is completely not the case. Because instead of the Lenin, you will have people like Krasnov, like Kornilov, and others that will really drown the revolution in a blood. And by Bolsheviks taking the power, they actually prevent this bloodshed. And also they save the I don't know how many millions of lives by the ending of the ending of the World War. That actually was taking place for almost 4 years now. So yeah, the revolution in Russia was not a putsch. There was always there is an anniversary. I'm always amazed how in the news you will hear there is an anniversary of Bolshevik putsch. But it was not a putsch. It was a revolution because it will not be possible to take power for Bolsheviks if they will not have a support of the millions of Russian ordinary people. And as I said, it was planned during the Second Congress of the Russian Soviets, where actually the Bolsheviks had the majority together with the left SRs that went in favor of the revolution. And through this democratic majority they had, they gained the authority to really do this revolution, to really win the power for the working class and the peasants. But in general the working class, because it was proletarian revolution, the proletarian dictatorship which they achieved. And when this revolution was, when it took place, the free decrets was actually accepted by the new government as they gained the Winter Palace in Petrograd and as the revolution started to spread. And those free decrets was about the government, about peace and about the land. The decree about the government was about the creating of the Committee of the People's Commissars that then took the power instead of the bourgeois ministers. There was a decree about the peace, which was a decree that was aiming towards the peace in the ending of the First World War. It was a proposal to the fighting nations to really stop the war. And there was a decree about the land, which was a redistribution of the land, which I was speaking about before, to give the land to the poor peasantry. And this is actually the demand by which the peasantry was won for the revolution, by the Proletariat and by their leader in the form of the Bolshevik Party. And later, of course, also the Lenin and Stalin decree about the right of nations to self-determination was achieved and progressed by the Bolsheviks, by which the freedom was gave to the nations living in Russia. Because before, Russia was a multicultural country, but where actually the Russian nation has the dominance, and the tzarist regime and also the bourgeois regime enjoyed actually the diversification between each nationalities, the fight between them, and of course the Bolshevik aimed to really give autonomy to these other nations of Russia, to give them freedom. But also it was not based on some kind of nationalism, which was something that Rosa Luxemburg did actually understood, which was something that was discussed not so long time ago on one of the discussions made by IMT, when there was an anniversary and also issue of the book on Rosa Luxemburg. And it was paradoxical to some point, because Rosa Luxemburg was born in the Zamość, in the occupied Poland by Russia, when she, of course, had an experience with Polish nationalists, which were completely reactionary, and Lenin and Bolsheviks were very often from the majority, Russian majority population of the Russia. So, on the superficial way of thinking, it seemed that they were like against their own interests, but of course they were internationalists. And they didn't, by this decree, they didn't really want to force two people to live with each other, but to create the conditions for those different nations to understand that they are the part of the one big Soviet Union, and on this basis to really unite them and win them for the future progress. Yeah, but this revolution in 1970, especially in backward country like Russia, when the proletariat considered very small area of the population, this created the opposition of the reaction, and this is why the civil war started. It was not started by Russia, but actually by the generals, former tzarist generals. They actually stepped in to attack the revolution as it started to spread from Petrograd. We had an uprising, or attempted uprising of the General Kaledin in Ukraine, but it didn't went nowhere because his soldiers actually refused to take their arms against the new Soviet government. So in the end, General Kaledin committed suicide because the soldiers completely didn't listen to him. And by death also ended the putsch, actually, by the General Kornilov, who actually before attacked the Kerensky government, but later also during the times of the October Revolution, he went to the Don Cossacks, which were conservative at the time. And during his attempt to really take arms against the Soviet power, he was killed by the shell. Artillery shell during the progress, which is also a very good thing. And by this revolt of the old Tsarist generals, actually the White Army was formed, which was the main opposition force and bourgeois forms, and Tsarist forms against the former, against the new formed Soviet government. And of course, as I said, for this reason, it's obvious that the revolution had to be able to defend itself, to not be drowned in the bloodshed. This is the reason why in December 1917 the Czech was formed under Dzerzhinsky, which was a secret police, and also the Red Army in the January 1918. The Red Army was formed by Trotsky from nothing, and in 1 year this army actually achieved the serious victories against the counterrevolution, against the White Army, which actually led the Red Army in the victory of this civil war that was actually started by these former Tsarist generals. But this Red Army was a very specific army. It was not an army in the bourgeois way of thinking, you know. There were not the bourgeois privileges like we have in the army we see in today time. There was no bourgeois generality or officers in command like we see today, but those people were actually elected, and actually the system of privilege was absent in the Red Army, as I told. And this Red Army actually didn't fight just by weapons, but also by ideas, which was a serious reason why actually the Red Army won during the Civil War, because as you know, it's very actually famous that Trotsky was traveling around the front lines with his armed train, and this train didn't just contain the armory, the weapons, but also the propaganda, the books, and also the projector, which was a very rare thing, especially in Russia at that times. And by the agitation, by the revolutionary agitation, it was possible to defeat not only White Army, but also the Green Army, Black Army, but also the intervention of 20 foreign armies, which actually were deployed in ports in the north, in Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, where actually Bolsheviks that came to those soldiers, these workers in uniforms, fraternized with them, and in those armies, actually, revolts start to occur, you know, very often. And in the end, those armies of the intervention had to be withdrawn from Russia, because those soldiers understood that they have no interest in fighting against their working brothers in Russia that are rising up against the oppression they are also witnessing in their homes. Yeah, as I told you, the new government that was formed in 1917 after the revolution was based on the Soviets. But what was those Soviets? Soviets is in a translation to Czech or to English, better, committee. And it was workers' committees, peasant committees, and also soldier committees, which were actually way more democratic than the bourgeois parliament we see today. Because today, especially in Czech Republic, we are forced to believe that it's enough for us to just vote for somebody and then to 4 years be quiet and listen to what this new government is actually telling us to do. In Czech it's very obvious right now, because we have now the new government of Spolu that has in fact very limited support of population. Because why people voted Spolu? Because they love Fiala? No, they voted the Spolu because they were fed up with Babiš, and they voted them as the biggest visible opposition towards them. So people are trying the different options, really, but they are very quickly see that this option they picked, the coalition of Spolu in the government right now, is not working in their favor by the cuts that I named, an attack of the living standard that we are witnessing now every single day, and it will actually be worse and worse. So yeah, the people in Russia after the Soviet Revolution, in October Revolution 1917, were organized in the Soviets, where they actually vote their authorities, and where they directly, when Tomio Okamura is speaking about the direct democracy, this was real direct democracy, when people can really control their lives and the area they live in by democratic discussion in the Soviets. And for this reason, actually, the bourgeois parliamentarism was abolished in Russia. Many propagandists, bourgeois propagandists doing anti-communist propaganda are pointing their finger of the dismantling of the Constituent Assembly in the January 1918 and saying, aha, here Bolsheviks started the totalitarianism because he destroyed the bourgeois parliament, and he did it because he didn't have a majority here. Which is a complete nonsense for two reasons. As I told you, there was a different structure of power, which was the Soviets, which were much more democratically. So not even a dog barked in Russia after dismantling of the bourgeois parliament. This is the first thing. And second of all, it's not true that Lenin dismantled the bourgeois parliament because they don't have majority there. Actually, Lenin supported the slogan "All power to the Soviets," even in the times when he didn't have the majority in the Soviets. There was a Menshevik SR leadership in the Soviets, and Lenin was saying during the times in 1917, "All power to the Soviets." So this argument of the demagogues, anti-communist demagogues, is completely false and complete lie. And yeah, so let's see what actually the Soviet power achieved in Russia by the revolution. So as I told before, the achievement of power of the working class in Russia was a big step forward in development of human society. Because, for example, the revolution destroyed the oppression of the women, or seriously reduced it at least, which was there before. Because before, how it looked like, the women were slaves of men in Russia, and the revolution actually gave women much things, like women were able to divorce with their husbands. It was not there before. The women start to be able to take part in politics. Alexandra Kolontai was the first so-called minister. She was People Commissar for Foreign Affairs, if I'm correct. What was precisely her function, if you can correct me. She was something with Foreign Affairs, and it was something like minister. But if you have to Google it, I will rather continue because it will take a lot of time. I think comrades can see on their internets the correct pronunciation of what I'm trying to say. But nevertheless, the women were able to work in high political positions. They were able to even do the jobs they were not able to do before. And also in Soviet Union, the women right to elect for election was achieved. And also in 1920, there was a legalization of the abortions, which was a big step forward. And now you see all those bourgeois liberals fighting for Poland, why they are also attacking for Polish women actually, for the abortion rights, why they are trying to exclude the Marxists. The Marxists actually are not the right answer for the oppression of the women, while actually it was Marxists who achieved such a things for a human society and especially for the working women, which contains the half of the working class, of course. And also there were new organizations of the Russian women that were formed, like Zhenotděl, that existed until 1930, when Stalinists dismantled them. Like Zhenotděl actually informed the women about their new privileges. They tried to emancipate them, educate them, and Zhenotděl also organized community kitchens and also laundries to really lift the oppression of the household work of the women's shoulders, to actually make them the full human beings, in society. And also the sexuality was liberated from the prejudices. As the homosexuality was legalized, we have Chicherin, who also was responsible for foreign affairs in Russia. And yeah, it was possible that people of the same sex actually were able to join the marriage, to marry themselves. So yeah, and also, of course, if somebody will try to accuse the Bolsheviks of being a bloody and demons from hell, of course they have to, they are seriously neglecting the fact that they actually achieved the end of the First World War. It was achieved by the revolutions. First of all, the revolution in Russia, but also the revolution in Germany. But also what I want to discuss specifically is a Brest-Litovsk peace for a while, which was happening before the German Revolution, but actually there is something about which I can destroy another argument of the anti-communist demagogues that are trying to say, hey, but Bolsheviks and Lenin win in the revolution only because of the German gold, because they were supported by Germans. Germans organized the revolution in Russia, which is complete bullshit for many reasons. One of them is the fact that if they will support the Bolsheviks, they will support the grave diggers, because the Bolsheviks in Russia supported the German Revolution. Actually, Lenin, his ideas, as he was internationalist, he knew that it's not possible to achieve socialism in an isolated backward country like Russia. That it has to be done in a developed capitalist country. So he was looking especially to Germany to actually, if needed, to sacrifice the Russian Revolution in favor of the German Revolution. And also, speaking about the Brest-Litovsk peace, there was a dispute between the leading Bolsheviks about the correct approach towards Germany, because some of those Bolsheviks, some of people like Bukharin, they actually wanted to continue the war with Germany. It's very strange that the agents of the German ruling class actually would like to continue the war with Germany, but there was a serious layer standing behind the Bukharin that wanted to continue the war, speaking about the revolutionary war, that the Red Army will continue their advance towards the Germany, and they will bring the revolution to the German workers, which is actually a bad idea and wrong idea, because you cannot cause the revolution. The revolution, as I told before, is initiated by the masses themselves. You cannot force them to liberate themselves. You can have Red Army supporting the German Revolution, but the revolutionary war is just not correct approach to this. And also different position was of Trotsky. While Trotsky admired the situation of not peace and not war, something like armistice, let's say, because he saw that Germany is weaker and weaker every day. So every day there was a better conditions for actually negotiating with the German side about the ending of the war. And yet, yeah, it's true that by the Brest-Litovsk peace, the Bolsheviks and the Reds had to give a lot of the land to the Germany, which they actually get back after the Germany collapsed under the revolution that started there in the end of the 1918. So yeah, this is the serious argument against the demagogy that Bolsheviks were the agents of the German gold, German capital. Yeah. Yeah, as I told before, the revolution, socialist revolution, cannot really be achieved, or socialism cannot be achieved arbitrarily. The ones who are more like familiar with historical materialism will know that the socialism to be achieved needs some amount of material basis. And for this reason, actually Marx in his times thought that the revolution will start in France, will continue in Germany and will end in England, because at his times those were the most developed capitalist countries in the world, with the strongest proletariat. And what was the conditions of the Russia? I told you already that the conditions of the Russia were very backward. And this was actually the reason why the revolution, when it was isolated, actually had inevitably to degenerate. This is why actually are completely wrong the Stalinist ideas of building the socialism in one country, which in the Russian conditions meant to build the socialism in backward Russia, which is completely anti-Marxist idea, as you can see by what I just said. And as I said, the revolutions in Germany and other countries, which was actually betrayed by Social Democrats and killed in many countries, like in Magyarország, Hungary, which was defeated a lot by Czechoslovaks, unfortunately. Actually, this led to this isolation of the revolution in Russia, and this is the reason why the degeneration started taking place. Because there was not material basis. You cannot build the socialism in the misery. You can build socialism only on the basics of the developed means of production, which was absent. So for this reason, of course, also the thinking of the people was affected by it, and a lot of people in this new society want to take the place in this new society and to secure their surplus, their welfare, actually, by being the part of the ruling clique, which was the bureaucracy. And this is what motivated so many opportunists to really join the party after it was obvious that the Reds will win the revolution, and why this strong layer of bureaucracy start to be founded in the Communist Party, newly formed Communist Party, that still started to affect this party more and more, and which actually Lenin fought against at the end of his life. While actually this bureaucracy found their interest in one specific person, which was a Stalin, which they created the alliance between those people, while Stalin became actually the most favorable person for this bureaucracy, because he guaranteed the rights to actually take this surplus created in the Soviet production, which was very limited and scarce. And this is the reason why actually this backwardness created the conditions for the generation of the revolution in Russia. And also, the serious problem was also the peasantry, because as I told you, the working class was very low, and there was a siege of peasants with their petty bourgeois interests, which are not working class interests, they are alien to some extent to the working class. And the peasants at the beginning of the revolution were won by the demand of the Bolsheviks for the land, for the redistribution of the land. But as the civil war was continuing, they very quickly turned their backs to the revolution, because from their land they gained, they were forced by the working class government to give food to the starving cities, because the rural areas were independent mostly in the question of food. And this is the reason why actually many workers cease to be workers and start to be peasants again. So the working class was seriously demolished during the course of the revolution. And yes, the siege of peasantry, which refused to actually support and give food from their gained land to the new Soviet power, start to organize themselves in serious ways. But the Bolsheviks obviously had to do it, had to confiscate the food, because they cannot let the cities to starve to death, or let the Red Army to starve to death. It was need to win the revolution, because there will be bloodshed if the revolution will not succeed, as I told before. So yeah, during the course of the revolution, different armies of the peasants were formed. First of all was a Green Army, which was an army of the Ukrainian separatists, led by the Ataman Grigoriev, which was a quite reactionary anti-Semite army, in fact, which actually did many pogroms against the Jewish population, which later divorced, it was dismantled, and part of this Green Army went to the Whites, part of them to the Reds. And also the Black Army was found up around the petty bourgeois anarchist influence, because, you know, during the course of the Civil War you had anarchists which were basing themselves on these petty bourgeois peasants that were attacking the new Soviet power. Some of them, not all of them, like people like Zhuk and Železnyakov actually supported the Soviet power, but there were layers of anarchists, the petty bourgeois ones, that actually did terrorism against the Soviet authorities, like people like Bukharin, for example. And also during the course of the revolution, the Black Army and the so-called Free Territory was created in Ukraine, in the region of Hulaypole. We can call it Machnovčina because it was organized by the main person, Nestor Machno. Yeah, actually it's Machnovčina, Black Army is a different thing. Okay. Yes, let's speak about Machnovčina. Actually, those anarchists are often portrayed by many ultra-leftists as fighters for freedom against the oppressive Bolsheviks, which is completely not true, because, you know, it's true that they don't have much problems, those Machnovists, in the regions where they have support from the peasant population. But if they were advancing to the cities, they actually had to fight against the Soviets. They dismantled the Soviets and they actually replaced the Soviets with the rule of their generals. So they created basically military juntas in the cities, which were completely anti-democratic. And they created also their secret police against the Soviets, against the actually communists, organized very interestingly by a guy named Leo Zadov, who was later the Stalinist agent, in fact. So yeah, in the regions when the anarchists had the support, this Machnovists had support, they had no much problem, but as soon as they reach the regions they don't have support in, they have to live as bandits. They attack the Soviet convoys, and also this was one of the important reasons why they have to be smashed and destroyed by the Red Army, which was successfully done in the end, which I'm glad for. Also, there was a big shift in the Navy, because during the course of the revolution, as I told before, in October 1917, the sailors, the revolutionary sailors, were the spine of the armed forces that attacked the Winter Palace. But this was quickly changing. You know, these sailors went to the front lines of the Civil War, while in Kronstadt specifically, they start to be replaced, because as the older sailors went to the front lines, the new conscripts went in, especially from the rural areas, from the peasant families. And during to the year 1921, it was more than half of the new conscripts that controlled the Kronstadt fortress. And actually, this was the reason why there was actually qualitative change in the revolutionary sailors, and why actually the sailors actually attacked the revolution in 1921, during the time when the revolution was really in a very bad situation, because there was a lack of food and the industrial output was very low. So yeah, there was a revolt of the sailors in Kronstadt, but it was not the same sailors which was there in 1917. And actually, the Kronstadt didn't raise up as a single man. The sailors, the so-called anarchist sailors, the petty bourgeois sailors, actually, that organized the mutiny, had to crush the sailors that were loyal to the Soviet power. So only from 20,000, like 5,000 actually rose up against the Soviet power. And of course they need to be crushed as well. And the reason why they were rising up was that actually the city, the Petrograd, which was starving, and there started to be like strikes and protests of the workers that receive not enough bread. Well, this was happening. The Kronstadt fortress actually had enough supplies. So Soviets were actually in favor of taking the Kronstadt supplies to support the starving masses in the cities, which the petty bourgeois sailors stand against. So yeah, this was the basis for this mutiny, and this was the reason why it had to be crushed, because if it will not be done, of course they will ally with the interventionists or the White Army, especially interventionists, because the White Army was defeated at the time. Yeah. So it's completely forced to think that they were some kind of real communists against the Soviet terror. No, they really weren't. Because also they destroyed the Soviets in the Kronstadt. They were replaced by so-called revolutionary committee, which was a committee of those mutineers. They actually jailed the communists which were present in Kronstadt, and they even issued the resolutions in favor of expelling the Jewish population from Russia. So yeah, many ultra-reactionary elements were against these Kronstadt sailors. And also, as interesting is that as they were crushed, many of them left to Finland, and their leaders, Petrichenko, actually later became the Stalinist agent of the GRU, which is also a very interesting thing. So yeah, the Russian Revolution actually achieved many things. I can speak also about the industry, because in the field of science and technology there was a serious development that actually laid the basis for the fact that the Soviet army, the Red Army, actually won in Second World War, because in the 30s, even during the times of Stalinist degeneration of the revolution, the Soviet output in the question of industry saw the unprecedented numbers in the human history, because in the course around 5 years, the industrial output of the Russia rose by 500%. And this was during the time when the economies in the West, the capitalist economies, were actually stagnating, because there was a crisis in the Western capitalist world. And this was the basis why actually the Soviet army, the Red Army, was able to build the forces to actually defeat the fascists in the Second World War. And also, what was achieved was literacy of the population, as I told. It was achieved that the Soviet economy was existing without the homelessness, without the unemployment. We can also compare the prices for energies. You know, we have now energy crisis. What was the price for energies during times of Soviet Russia? You know, so it's no wonder that many people actually, the older people, look back during the times of the degenerated worker state, and even it was the totalitarian state. Many people actually see this regime as better than the regime they are living now, because this economy achieved great advantages and also great developments for the human standards of living. So yeah, the Russian Revolution actually proved, as I told in the beginning, that the people, the working people, can actually organize themselves. They can win, they can defeat capitalism, they can achieve the system without the capitalists, without the landlords, and without any forms of oppression which are present in the capitalist system. And this is actually the basics why we are learning about the Russian Revolution. We are not discussing now today the Russian Revolution as some kind of historical fetish. We are actually reading and studying the Russian Revolution to achieve the revolution in days of our time. Because as I told, we are living in a system that is extremely obsolete, that are showing us on every day that it doesn't have anything prepared in favor of progress of human society. We saw in fact the decreasing of the human standards of living. We see the speculation in the household. We have a household crisis, an energetical crisis. We have more and more homeless living on the streets because they cannot pay the rent. We have students that cannot really expect the better living conditions their parents have. And this is actually why we are organizing. This is why we are discussing the Russian Revolution, to be actually prepared to Yes, and I have basically one last sentence to say. And we are learning about the Russian Revolution to actually stand up on the shoulders on such giants as Lenin and Trotsky to achieve from their experiences the revolution in our times. And this is why we are here, this is why we are organizing, and this is why we are discussing the Russian Revolution. Thank you very much, comrades, and you can turn it off.